Look, we're now going to pass over to Garry Reeve, and he's going to talk to us about developing a livable community strategy and committee. And Garry is from the West Coast Council. Welcome, Garry.
Thanks, Sue. Does this automatically pull out, or do I have to do something?
We'll pop on spotlight.
Lovely job. Yeah, so my name's Garry Reeve. I'm the Community Development Officer for West Coast Council. Just some background. Like Lyndon, most of my adult life has been spent in education, particularly in enterprise and learning, and working with disenfranchised groups of people, remote here and on the mainland. And 12 months ago this week, I moved to the West Coast to take up this job. So I'm probably a bit of a newbie, and I bow to your combined wisdom. This presentation will be more of a conversation. I do have available documentation of our 2025 community plan and also the KPMG Livable, better read it properly, the KPMG West Coast Livable Community Strategy. If anyone wants those, I can pass those on. So let's hop in. So West Coast Council's Livable Community Strategy arose out of the work and the research done around the West Coast Community Plan 2025. That in itself was a first. It was the first 10-year strategic plan that West Coast had taken on in quite some time. KPMG were engaged to do that strategy, and it's approximately 123, 124 pages. And from that consultation and from the plan, several key priorities were identified relating to older population, and they were as follows. Firstly, an improvement in the depth and breadth of healthcare services available in the region, dentists, podiatrists, those sorts of things. Secondly, increasing the availability of aged care and respite facilities, servicing and services, because there's an increasing demand. Thirdly, there needed to be an improvement in public transport options, including disability and medical transport. Fourthly, activating a healthy lifestyle culture, and Council had already started to some degree with this by looking at MTBs, getting out, get moving, increasing access to council-owned gyms. I've never actually lived in a municipality where the council owns the gyms, and at the end of, I think by the end of next year, each town will have access to a circuit-based gym at really cheap rates, like seriously cheap rates. So finally, there was the fifth strategy, the fifth thing they looked at, which was better engagement and/or coordinated partnerships with agencies, industry partners, and the community to improve resident access in a more holistic range of services and support. And out of this so far, what's actually happened is we've developed an MTB strategy with federal funding for approximately 50 kilometres of tracks, and that already, even though it's a long way from being finalised and opened, is increasing the excitement around physical activity here down on the West Coast. We're seeing a lot more people getting out locally and a lot more visitors coming down and encouraging and building that culture of not sitting home on the couch because it's cold, but getting out and having a bit of a go at doing some sort of physical activity. Also, we have instigated a intertown transport trial with state growth funding of $100,000. That will run over, or will run over the 12 months this year. COVID hasn't been particularly helpful in that regard. So we're looking to maybe extend that a little bit further out. And whether or not the numbers stack up, it may well be one of those services that council provides for the greater good rather than having a good business plan and making money out of it as such. But that's in effect happening at the moment. And then the area that I'm particularly involved in as Secretariat is the Liveable Community Subcommittee of Council. And this has been a real eye-opener for me. When I first came back to Tassie from the Territory, one of the first visits I had for training was to COTA in Launceston. And I got to admit, I thought I knew a fair bit about stuff to do with old people. I knew nothing. In fact, I sat there 10 minutes in, I think my jaw pretty well much was stuck on the floor, as all of these people were telling me all these different things, services to be accessed, age plans. Just, I had no idea. And I came back to council with Dirk, who's our special projects manager, who'd been working in that space, and he quickly brought me up to speed on just what it meant to be to have a livable community. And from that conversation, from the work done in the 2020 plan, we went about creating a livable community subcommittee over a 6-month period. One of our councillors, Kerry Graham, is the chair, and we engaged a consultant from Launceston to come and work with a bunch of people on the weekend to look at what the issues were as the community saw them, to pull apart the Community Plan 2025, to determine the structure of our committee, whether it would simply be advocacy or something with a bit more teeth to it. And over the course of that time, we came to the conclusion that we needed a dynamic, predominantly locally led committee, so that we could look at strategies and answers that would be place-based and particular to the West Coast. We're never going to have the numbers to have like a full-blown aged care system as one thing, but we could possibly, with some smart work, some lateral thinking and playing around with the system a bit, create a multi-service faceted structure, if you like, or unit or place that has a combination of standard medical services, allied services, some respite care facility, you know, on a smaller scale, but particular and suited to the West Coast. And that's one of the things that community is looking at the moment. Another thing that it's looking at is a West Coast priority card. People tend to forget that we don't have a lot of the services that the rest of you guys take for granted. So for us to get a dentist or a podiatrist or a massage, it's a 2.5 hour drive out to the coast, then the service, and then 2.5 hour drive back in. Some of our people quite often don't get appointments until late in the day. So travelling back to the West Coast in winter overnight, not a good option. So we're looking to try and work with some providers that takes into account that distance factor and allows those members from the West Coast who need those services, particularly our older people, to be cared for at an earlier time than a later time, and thus removing one of the stresses of travelling back in. Let's think what else. So that committee has identified that whatever we do, it needs to be grounded in the idea of being based around a place-based answer, particularly for here. A holistic, integrated approach is of more value than a one-off or a one-centred approach. And because of that economy of scale, as we talked about before, then we needed to look at innovative ways to connect services so that we got the most bang for buck, I guess you would say. Just an example of that, out of conversations with the committee and also with some of our community-based organisations, in this case Rosebery Development Association, they're looking at taking over one of the council pools and restructuring and repurposing that space to become a hydrotherapy and allied services centre. We have a lot of people, particularly older ones again, who go out to the coast to use float tanks, hydrotherapy, water aerobics to help injuries or health conditions. And often those costs are anywhere from $180 to $320 each time. This group are looking at working with a facility that can no longer function as a pool, but with some smart investment, uses tied in with people who are existingly coming down to the West Coast, or who our people go out to see, creating a centre here that would make access to those sorts of facilities a lot easier for our people. And that's actually receiving really good feedback. So that's the most of it, what we're up to. Like I said, this is more conversational than presentational. So if you want some of those other documents, happy to send them through. Any questions, fire away and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Garry. That sounds like you've got some really exciting initiatives going on in the West Coast. I was around there a couple of weekends ago and we had absolutely wonderful weather, but I do take your point about the connection between the towns on the West Coast. It'll be a really important strategy, and we're going to watch with interest. COTA is really excited to say that we've just appointed someone in the aged care system navigator space that can service the Northwest Coast and the West Coast. So Heather's looking forward to being able to get down and visit you on the West Coast, Garry.
Thanks, Sue.